Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and this is not a review. Today, I am counting down my top 50 TV shows of all time, which was difficult. In fact, I originally intended on having this out in January, and I kept tinkering with the list over and over again, and found it very difficult to make. The main reason why I found it difficult largely was because mixing series that are hour-long dramas or more straight stuff with sitcoms and comedies, I found quite difficult. How do I compare some of my favorite sitcoms of all time with some of the most hard-hitting serialized dramas of all time? I find it really tough, and I tend to give prestige more to one than the other, and I didn't want to necessarily shortchange anything, and it made it really tough. And I've never liked mixing the two different, to me, your hour-long drama and your sitcom are almost two different mediums. They're both TV, but they're both two different types of TV. And mixing those is really hard for me, so it took a long time to do this. Eventually, I had to hit a point, though, where I'm like, I'm done. It's time to do this. It's time to actually say what I've assembled here. Before I get into it, obviously, first things first, this is the list as of right now. My mind changes and alters, and if you asked me to do this in 6 months' time, a few things would probably change around. The other thing that I want to get out of the way first as well is I really obsessed over the idea of whether or not I should include anything that, one, isn't finished yet, so I don't have the full scope of the entire show to include, or in the same vein, something that I just haven't finished yet, but I've seen a good chunk of or a lot of. I ultimately came down on this idea that if I'd seen enough of it, or if I think that I know what my opinion is of it, I think it is valid if I already know where I want to put it. But then for other things, I also had the other dilemma of, what about a show that had an incredible season, or maybe even incredible seasons, but nosedived after the fact? And my opinion of the whole show is really kind of low, actually, and I don't really recommend it or whatever. But those first seasons are so special and so worth mentioning. Do I include them? And ultimately, I decided that I would include a couple of things like that. Mainly just because when I looked at what I had at numbers 50, 49, and around there, I said, really, I feel like recommending season one of this show feels more important than throwing in this weird quirky pick I had at number 50, because it feels worth acknowledging some of these shows that did have an incredible season. Now, admittedly, some of these things are very, I kind of capped them in a sense, where something where I only really liked a season of is going to be relatively low in the list, regardless of how good that season is, right? I'm not saying season one of a show that I put at number 50 isn't, I'm not saying something that's at number 35 is much, much better than that season of the show, but ultimately, because my opinion of the show as a whole is somewhat sullied by the later seasons, I just said, okay, these lower numbers get to kind of maybe be some, not honorable mentions, but stuff that had a great season and then didn't get much more than that or went downhill over time. So there's a couple of those and a couple of things that aren't finished yet, but I felt like I had to include them because I feel so strongly about them. But they, generally speaking, are in the first kind of chunk, because there's no way I could justify putting something that's only had a few seasons or isn't finished yet, really high in the list above other things that have finished. And I know stick the landing, and I know that I love all the way through. But it's kind of a weird thing. But anything that I've only seen a little bit of, or I don't feel like I've seen enough of yet, it just wasn't considered. Like, for example, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, I'm only on season 2 of that. It's far too early for me to have an opinion of where that's going to land. I do think it'll probably end up being one that I really like, and one that will probably place in a new version of this list someday. But as of right now, there's no way I can include that. But Star Trek The Next Generation, on the other hand, I'm halfway through season 7. I'm pretty confident what my opinion is of that show. So there's a good chance you're going to see that on this list somewhere. Alright, that's the preamble. I think I can just get into it now. This is going to take a while. I don't know how long this is going to take. If it goes silly long, I might end up splitting it in two. I don't want to do that, but we'll see. We'll see how much I ramble on. So here we go. My top 50 TV shows of all time. And of course, there's some notable shows that I have not watched. Or indeed, there's some notable shows that people love that I didn't like. So there's not everything you might expect to see in a top 50 TV shows is going to be here. I wouldn't say them right now because just so there's this whole anticipation for if just in case you don't know what I've not seen. But yeah, there's going to be some omissions that people would normally expect. So okay, let's get into it. My top 50 TV shows of all time, at least as of March 2025, anyway. Things always shift around and shit. I had a lot of like almost made it's as well, of course. Maybe I'll shout out a few of those when we get to the end. So, number 50. Number 50 is just season 1 of a show. Because it kind of dwindled after that. But I could not ignore the first season of The Handmaid's Tale. Because it was excellent. The performances, the way it built the drama, it felt soul destroying with every episode, and I mean that in the best way possible. It got you engrossed in what was happening and felt oppressive, and it was supposed to feel oppressive, and it was really well done. And of course, after season 1, they were kind of like making their own new material because season 1 was an adaptation of the book. So, and it didn't like just nosedive either. I thought there were still a lot of good things in season 2, and even some good stuff in season 3. But notably in season 3, it was starting to feel a bit more hit and miss between like the good and the bad. Like it felt like it was a bit more 50-50 if you were going to get a good episode or not. And then I watched a little bit of season 4, and I just kind of didn't really want to anymore. I just, things hadn't evolved enough, and it felt like, some wheels were being spun. But that first season is so immaculate in how it builds to its kind of open climax. Now, it's not that open anymore because season 2 exists, but this dystopian future. That's the thing. It's like you don't really think of it as a science fiction story because it doesn't like have a lot of high tech stuff in it or anything like that. But technically, it is a sci-fi story. It's a dystopian world. It's where America's turned into Gilead and women are being forced into these sex slave roles. And I'm kind of dumb. That's a very dumbed down explanation of it. There's a lot more to it than that. But like the exploration of that and it all coming from the perspective of Elizabeth Moss's character is super well done. And just the feeling of helplessness as you're watching and just looking for a glimmer of hope really hits hard. And I couldn't ignore how good season 1 was because I did nothing but praise it when it was coming out. Probably 7 years ago, 8 years ago now. It's been a while. So yeah, that's number 50. There you go. Similar vein, number 49. Similar idea here, and that is season 1 of Westworld. Because, goddamn, it hurts me that I quit this show, right? It hurts me that I was so disappointed in the end of season 3, despite the fact that there were some things in season 3 I quite liked. It hurts me that I quit it after one episode of season 4 because it just instantly felt like, oh, we're just doing this again. And it's such a shame because season 1 was a very special watching experience. It had the mystery box element. It had all these mysteries going on, and people were theorizing throughout the season, which was a lot of fun. But it also looked ridiculously expensive. It felt vast. It felt like super high prestige science fiction in a way that really just tickled my bones in every way it possibly could. You've got veterans in there like Ed Harris giving it this credibility, Anthony Hopkins. But you have just this exploration, and whenever you're dealing with like androids or robots, and if you don't know what the premise of Westworld is, Westworld's a theme park where you can go and have your Wild West fantasy, and a lot of the people there are actually robots, so you're allowed to kill them. You're allowed to do anything you want to them, and some people do very dark things. And it's kind of about the waking up of some of these robots. Really solid stuff, and it plays with narrative structure in a way that's very unique and ties in with who the characters are we're following and the way they work. Really phenomenal stuff. And again, I can't really go any higher despite how good season 1 of this show was, because it got to the point where I quit. I kept giving it chances, and it led me down a stray, and it actually got cancelled after season 4, so it didn't even get to a proper ending, I don't believe. I don't know how much of a cliffhanger it ended on, but because I stopped watching it. But yeah, it's just a shame. It's a shame. It's having a show that you were so passionate about just sort of like slowly kind of die in front of you, and you lose interest in it is a real shame. But yeah, so I had to include it, but I couldn't. Again, I had to be at the bottom of the list for those reasons. So 48, number 48 is our first comedy on the list, and it's a UK comedy, and that is Red Dwarf. Now, I've not actually seen all of Red Dwarf, but that's because they brought it back for like some modern seasons in the last like decade or so. There's like I think up to a season 12 of Red Dwarf. But there's like the original 8 seasons, and then I think I saw the special like miniseries they did after that, and I don't think I've seen any of the newer stuff that came beyond that. But that original show was really good stuff. It's unsurprisingly, I'm now 3 for 3 with science fiction shows. I like sci-fi. Is that, can you tell? But this is a comedy. It's a comedy with the last survivor aboard a ship called the Red Dwarf, and the only person he's got to talk to is a hologram based on the roommate that he had that he didn't get along with. And it's kind of just this odd couple living together on a ship, and the only other life forms, well, later on there's like an android character added, but like there's like a being that's evolved from the ship's cat, which, again, the science of any of this is not important. It's really just an excuse to have episodes that take sci-fi concepts and have like a comedy take on them, and that's very much what it was. And like a lot of British shows, it's only like 6 or 7 or 8 episodes a season, so it's not like a ton of it to get through. But it does a lot of fun things, and I remember like seeing like random episodes here or there on TV growing up and enjoying it whenever I did. So there was a time, I think, in my late teens where I made an effort to actually watch through the whole thing in order, and I was very glad that I did. So yeah, so again, there's going to be a few picks like this where I think a lot of the American audience probably won't know what I'm talking about, but that's okay. That's okay. I can't ignore some of the stuff that maybe isn't going to be as worldwide appeal if it's on my list. So, but yeah, that's Red Dwarf, which is worth checking out and giving it a try. Number 47 is kind of a favorite from growing up that isn't like high art by any means. It's not some prestigious TV show, but like I kind of had to have it because it's kind of, I don't know, there's like this, as far as nostalgia goes for like a TV show, this is one that just ranks up there for me, and that is Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. I was into Superman as a kid, and I remember being so excited at the idea of it being a TV show, and I remember watching as religiously as I could when I was at the age where I didn't really know how to keep a schedule. But I remember having like a good dozen episodes taped off TV and rewatching them and really loving it. And again, it's one of those things where when DVD box sets of seasons and being able to just buy like a whole TV show became a thing, I did it with that show because I wanted to watch it. Even though, season 3 and 4 are not as good as 1 and 2, there's still some fun stuff in there, and I found a lot to like still. And I've actually rewatched the show like maybe 3 times over the course of my life, and I always have a good time with it. I think part of it is that I think Terry Hatcher's probably my favorite Lois Lane. I think it's probably got my favorite live action Perry White as well. So there's a lot of the supporting cast that are really good, and it's just got like a really nice vibe for a 90s Superman set show, right? They do a lot of things where, the Daily Planet itself's got kind of an old wooden aesthetic. There's kind of an old kind of newspapery feel to the sort of the art style that they're going for, and it just, I it's just one of those things where, like, I don't imagine this is a show that pops up in a lot of people's top TV shows of all time, and it's not very high on my list, of course, because I'm not delusional. But it brings me joy whenever I go back and watch it again. So I had to have it here. So that is Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. Number 46, we're back to a UK show, actually, although this is one that Americans might know. They might have heard of this one, and that is, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean's a thing that was on TV a lot growing up. Not that there's that many episodes, but they repeated them a lot. And I watched it a bunch as a kid. I remember going to see the movie. That's where he goes to Hollywood, and loving that as a kid as well. But Mr. Bean's just simple, old school, like, kind of slapstick, but also kind of just like, he's this character who in the show never really spoke. And if he did, it was like very rare, and it was kind of a weird like noise he made when he tried to. He's this silent character who is not even that sympathetic because he's kind of a dick with the way he does things. But that's what makes him so memorable. Is he's such a really strong character in the way that he interacts with people, the way he tries to cheat at things, and the way he tries to solve problems. Such as like how does he get his new like fancy comfortable chair home? Like he straps it to the top of his car and he tries to drive his car from above the top of his car using like ropes and like sheets and stuff that he's made a pulley system with. And it's just to be honest, for a comedy on a British TV show, a fairly big stunt set piece of a sequence, to be honest. But just a super memorable character, very laugh out loud. The comedy is mostly pretty timeless. Because it is all visual gags. There's maybe a few things, like he's got like an electric meter at one point where he has to keep putting in money in to keep it running. That is like super old fashioned. I don't think I've ever seen that in real life, but I assume it was a real thing. So no, I there's just a really simple appeal to Mr. Bean. There's also again a bit of nostalgia for this one, and maybe there's a few things low down here where there's like some nostalgia mixed in with the quality, but I did go back and rewatch all the original Mr. Bean and the movie probably about 5 years ago now. It's not been that recent, but like in my adult life, so this isn't just all based on memories. Like I did go through them and still found them very funny at a certain point. So and it's something that I know because it is short enough that it is worth returning to at some point. So Mr. Bean gets a mention. And Mr. Bean did the turkey on the head thing long before Friends did. Just I'll throw that out as well while I'm here. So that's number 46. Number 45, we're sticking with comedy for the most part here, but much more recent and much less, well, it's not that much less British actually, because it's Ted Lasso. It's actually very British in a lot of ways, but it's not a British production, I don't think. But anyway, either way, like you probably know what Ted Lasso is. I don't have to explain it. I think Ted Lasso was impressive just because of how earnest and feel good it is. And it's not because it doesn't tackle tough things. There's some really good scenes where characters do have to address what's eating at them. And Ted Lasso is this really upbeat character who's always positive, but there's also this underlying idea that he's actually very depressed. And the exploration of that I actually think is quite good. It's why I said we're sticking with comedy mostly, because while it is definitely a comedy, it does do a lot of like more serious drama things as well, kind of sprinkled in there, which I think does make it feel quite unique. I know the internet kind of turned on the season 2 and 3 a bit, but I still found it very watchable, and there is like side plots that are a bit fluffy, and I didn't love in the second and third season, but there was still really up there moments, and some of my favorite characters on the show were still having great scenes, great plot lines. The friendship between Roy Kent and Ted Lasso is like one of the best like pairs of characters on TV in a long time, I think. Just super endearing, not without its missteps, but when it does try and do something hard hitting or emotional, it often kind of landed. Just characters forgiving another character, for example, towards the end of the show. Well, I say the end of the show. They're coming back for a season 4, but for a while it seemed like three seasons was it. But it's super like feel good in a way that it's nice to have something not be cynical. And I think Ted Lasso's like optimism and him trying to be positive, but also not hiding the fact that maybe he's like still hurting for real and he does still need help and he just can't admit it because he's trying to be positive all the time. It really presents you with a couple of complex characters that you get to kind of explore, whilst also just kind of laughing a lot and having fun with all the various things that you do. Sometimes it kind of has the tone of a really upbeat romantic comedy, or like it tries to do like an inspirational moment. And I'll add on here, just before I move on, that I do not care about the sport of football. I don't really like any sport. I think they're all pretty boring to watch, but I detest football because growing up in the UK, you're assumed if you have a penis that you're going to love football, and I hated it. I thought it was boring as shit. But that doesn't matter in Ted Lasso. I mean, just like it doesn't matter in sports movies, because there's plenty of sports movies that I enjoy. It doesn't matter. But it's not really about the game itself. It's about the characters. It's about them working together It's about their personal lives, all those other things. It does not matter if you don't care about the sport that they're there to play. So yeah, Ted Lasso, shockingly good show. There you go. That's number 45. Number 44, we're going a little bit darker here with number 44, and that is Mindhunter, which is the David Fincher produced, and he directed several episodes of the show, but only got 2 seasons, sadly, mainly because David Fincher decided that he didn't want to commit to doing 5 years of a TV show, or however many it was going to be, which is a real shame, and it's why it's maybe down here and not a bit higher up. But this is very much your kind of early days of criminal psychology, set in the 70s, looking at various serial killers that had popped up. And some of the highlights of the show is the young FBI agent who goes to speak and interview these various killers. And the idea is that if they can understand the killers better, maybe they can help stop some of the active ones, or help save more people. And it gave me a kind of really cool pair of characters where you've got the old, like, grizzled FBI agent who thinks this is a bunch of nonsense, but ends up working with the young guy who's got all these ideas, and they kind of form this partnership, and that friendship grows. That's like a heart of the show. But then you've got all of the cool, like, morbid, like, we're going to talk to a serial killer, and we're going to feel uncomfortable as he describes what he did to someone and why he did that to someone, and like, just really good stuff. And it felt like the perfect thing for Fincher to do, honestly. It felt like Fincher's done some serial killer stuff in some of his movies, and having him do this kind of, if he stuck with this, Mindhunter could honestly maybe have become his magnum opus, where it's like everything he's done is built to this, like, larger idea of like an examination of the idea of the serial killer as a whole, and kind of going through a lot of the famous ones, and kind of just taking it all, because obviously they'd already done Zodiac, and Seven wasn't based on a real person, of course, but like, he'd done that, and these were things that kind of felt like it led up to Mindhunter. And Mindhunter itself was building to, one particular killer that they kept teasing, and seems like we'll never get there now, which is a real shame. Those 2 seasons are very good, though, and it's just a shame that we'll never get any more of it. But it's the sort of thing where, on paper, it didn't necessarily appeal to me that much, just because there's so many cop shows or detective shows about killers that are very throwaway. So there's nothing with that subject that I dislike. I think there's tons of good serial killer movies and stuff. But with TV, you're looking at your CSIs, your NCISs, all that kind of thing. There's kind of a generic assumption with this type of premise, but it's very good. And back when Netflix was making several good shows at a time, Mindhunter was one of them. Those years feel long gone now, but this was one of them at the time. So that's number 44. 43, back to comedy with Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which I've actually not quite finished yet. I'm watching the penultimate season kind of slowly right now. This is just one of these things where, like, I'm terrible for watching sitcoms as they air, just because it doesn't feel like appointment viewing. I kind of like to binge them. But I've seen most of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I feel pretty confident on my feelings with it. Not my favorite of, like, the shows from this sort of same group of creators, but it's a very solid one, and like a lot of those other shows, has really strong characters. It doesn't have the mockumentary thing, of course, but it does have, there's characters here that just stand out. The 2 in particular that just, like, are the instant favorites are Captain Holt and Rosa, who just constantly make me laugh, and they're constantly doing things that work. They play on various tropes of cop TV shows and things like that. It's just a good time. It's just not as great as maybe 1 or 2 other shows that might pop up later on this list. But, like, super, especially given, like, when Brooklyn Nine-Nine kind of kicked off, it kind of felt like a lot of other sitcoms I like were kind of, like, ending and going away, or were maybe on the edge of going away. This was kind of a nice, like, oh, there's a network sitcom, because that's the thing, like, network sitcoms get to have 20 plus episodes a season. There's a nice good amount of it to binge, and typically, if the writers are good, like, they can do a lot with those episodes, because it's comedy. They don't have to stretch out big serialized stories over that amount of time. They can just do fun ideas in 22 minutes. So I think Brooklyn Nine-Nine really works in that format. I like that it has as many episodes as it does. And yeah, the characters are just super likable and very funny. So no great analysis here, but again, Holt and Rose are being the standouts. The dryness and the deadpan is really good. Nothing warms my heart more than Holt giving a bad joke about how much he hates Madeline Wench, if that was her name. I think that's her name. His nemesis. He's got a nemesis, and he hates her. Anytime he spoke about her, I was always into it. And because he was always so dry, whenever he did show a little bit of emotion, it always like landed and felt like a big deal. So, and I don't mean like when I say show emotion, I don't mean like there was emotional scenes. I mean when he showed emotion, it was usually really funny because it was like, oh, he's actually willing to show that he cares about this stupid thing when he normally wouldn't, and that would always be hilarious. So, yeah. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, number 43. Number 42 is Homecoming, which is the Sam Esmail show that he did for Amazon. Now, technically, there's 2 seasons of this show. I'm not really including season 2 in this. And to be fair, Homecoming was made as a limited series. Amazon just decided to do a sequel season a bit later on, which was loosely connected, and I didn't think was anywhere nearly as good. So when I'm talking about Homecoming, I'm really only talking about season 1, but it's a little bit different to some of the other ones that I only gave 1 season to, because this is a complete story. Season 1 of Homecoming is a full story starring Julia Roberts, and something to do with like these veterans who are being experimented on with this medication. But it's very fun in how it plays with like just storytelling mechanics, right? The episodes are kind of an interesting length for like a serious drama / thriller. There's like aspect ratio stuff that's being played with, where one of the plot lines that are in this really narrow aspect ratio, and there's a reason for it that comes up later in the show, and it's a really cool moment when you kind of like get that thing. People who have seen it will know exactly what I'm talking about, but it's used really very effectively, and it felt like Esmail was just having fun experimenting and telling a story with just like all the tools in the toolbox that he could think of. Really good thriller, really good 1 season thing. I like highly recommend Homecoming, and because a lot of the episodes are only like 30 minutes, it's not a long watch. Like you can get through all 10 episodes and maybe like well, I guess 5 hours, but but yeah, some of them are pretty short. It wasn't like doing these big hour-long episodes, which made it kind of perfect for binging. I tend to prefer weekly releases, but if the episodes are that short, it is kind of tough to feel like you should be waiting a week between them. But that's not that stopped Disney Plus with a lot of their shows, admittedly, but still. Homecoming, excellent stuff. And there's not a lot of stuff in it with Julia Roberts that I find myself a fan of. Obviously, she's very successful. She has a lot of movies and things like that. But I'm not exactly into Pretty Women or like other things that she would normally be in. So it was kind of interesting seeing her be in this more cerebral thriller that I would be into from a creator that I really like. So it was kind of nice to see this actress who is very successful and famous in other regards, but I tend to have avoided her just purely because of the type of stuff that she's normally in. So it was cool to see her flourish a little bit in this way. Homecoming, very good. Number 41 is Squid Game. Now, this was one I debated over a lot with, of like what to include here when it comes to a show like Squid Game. But I couldn't deny, as I was like squaring it up against these other shows, just how goddamn like good it is. like season 1 was phenomenal, and it came out of nowhere for most people, and it blew up in this big way. It's super exciting and tense and thrilling because of the games, and like they're very inventive, and every single time they played a game on that show, because that's the whole premise of the show, is that all these people are kind of made this offer to go to an island and play these games to win money, but the flip side of that is that anyone who loses the games gets killed. So there's like a real set of stakes to it, and it feels very horrific. But it also is like a proper show in the sense that it takes time to examine like the fact that these people are being corrupted by someone who clearly is serving the rich. The audience for these games is clearly rich people, and this is the poor that are being preyed on. So there's a lot of social commentary, a lot of class commentary, that kind of thing. The characters are very endearing, some of them. There's also villainous characters that are very easy to hate. It really is well done, and I think season 2 is also very, very, very good. And uses what season 1 set up and does some interesting things with it. Oh, the one caveat being is that season 2 is really just half of a second season, because they kind of made one season and split it in two for 2 and 3, and we're at this point right now where we're waiting on the final chapter, the final season, which is the second half of the sequel story. But even just on the strength of season 1, I felt like Squid Game had to be here because I love it. It's thrilling, it's fun, it's got something to say, and it was just a really well-paced show, and that really sticks out to me, especially with a Netflix show, is just how well-paced it is. And the only reason why it's this low on the list, relatively speaking, is purely because it's not finished yet, and I can't say for sure, is it going to stick the landing and feel like a really satisfying thing as a whole. So I kept it in the 40s for that reason. I sort of put a bit of a limit on it and said it's not going any higher than this. But it's excellent, and it's very easy to recommend Squid Game. And it'll be easier once the final season's out and we can know what the full, picture's like. But yeah, Squid Game season 1 and 2. Great stuff. Particularly season 1, but 2 is still really good, I think. I think the internet was a little bit harsh on 2 in a lot of ways. So, number 40 is another Netflix show, actually. Again, back from the time when Netflix made some interesting content, and that is the OA, which is the Brit Marling show. Which, this is one where it's just like such a unique style and tone. It's this ethereal kind of journey of this woman who had been blind and had went missing for years, kind of returns home, and everyone's sort of questioning what happened to her. And she ends up telling a group of, I guess we'll call them friends, people who are drawn to her. Some of them are high school students, but one's a teacher. And a lot of the first season is her just basically telling the story of what happened, and there's kind of this structure of getting a little bit of the present day stuff, and then the story that she's telling. And there's a little bit of maybe a supernatural thing to some of it, or a science fiction thing, depending on how you want to look at it. But the tone, the music, the way it presents everything is just very unique. It's very distinct to these creators, to Brit and her writing partner, because you can tell watching this that you're watching something from the same people who did Murder at the End of the World, or even to an extent not After Earth, that's the Will Smith movie, Another Earth is what I'm trying to say. Even that, to an extent, there's kind of a shared tone and feeling and a vibe to all of their work that really sticks out to me. And I think they're very good at doing this kind of art house drama with a kind of hopeful sort of mysticism kind of quality to it. There's also a lot of emphasis on the idea of telling your story to someone, and how that's a big part of it, is just telling people this story, and kind of so it's almost like an exciting story for the other characters to hear as much as for us to see and hear. And just really well done. And season 2 maybe isn't as perfect as season 1 by any means, but it does do some really interesting things and kind of furthers the bigger ideas that it set up. And it is a shame that we're never going to get any more of it, because season 2 ends with a huge whoa cliffhanger thing, but it still kind of works. And because the OA kind of felt like a show that even if it knew it was ending, it would probably give us something like that at the end to make our minds go, whoa, what if this, and just leave us there. So it kind of works, but they were clearly planning something really ballsy for season 3. It's a shame we won't get it. But the experience of that show, especially season 1, was such a unique and just a different type of TV show to everything else that was at the time. Because it was around the same time that Mindhunter was coming out, and it just very different to that, very different to anything else that was on TV, and just sort of getting into the characters and just loving that there was kind of a really strong artistic vision from creators who clearly wanted a particular voice and wanted it to feel a certain way, and it didn't, none of it felt like it was bogged down and this has to feel like a Netflix show, or it has to feel like this type of show. It truly felt like its own thing. And it's something that as I've gotten older I've really appreciated, is when I can really feel there's a creator's vision, good or bad, for better or worse. There is a creator making choices here, and I really loved that about that show. So that is the OA. Maybe a bit of a quirkier pick here, but I would recommend people give it a try. it is definitely the type of thing though where some people will try it and just think some of it is stupid, and that's okay. I'm not going to fight you if you think it's stupid. It's not for you, and you can leave. But for those that connect with it, and for those who find it working, I think it is quite special. So maybe give it a try. That is the OA. Number 39 is Chuck. Now this is a light-hearted action comedy show. We'll try to ignore any dumb things that the lead actor has said in the past few years, but Chuck was a show, and this is kind of something that a few network shows have done for me over the years, where I didn't love season one. Season one of Chuck is just okay. It was very watchable, and for some reason, though, I kept watching it. Like it was comfort food enough that I didn't stop. And there's just something in season two that felt like it clicked, where all of a sudden I kind of just became really endeared to a lot of the characters. I was really invested in where their relationships were going to go and things like that. Not because, and not in the sense that it's like a super dramatic show. It was never a show that had plots that you really cared about like other TV shows, right? It was always so lighthearted that it never really felt like it would do anything that you'd have to worry about. Like it was never going to like kill off a lovable character. It was never going to do something like that. It was too happy of a show to do that. But yeah, somehow it felt like this kind of just really endearing show to watch, because it would do all these love letter things to different action movies. Eventually they had Linda Hamilton show up, and it was kind of a love letter to like her being, this star from the Terminator, and just a lot of the things that it did. It felt like it really, it punched above its weight in so many ways, and I guess the writing's a big part of that. But I also really like the ending of Chuck, and it's something that really divided fans when it happened, but I think the ending of Chuck did something kind of ballsy, which is that for the first time in its show and its run, after thinking it was going to get cancelled for multiple seasons, it got that final 5th season, which does have an ending, and that final couple of episodes actually did something that the show had never done for me before, which is it actually gave me stakes. It actually made me worry that things wouldn't be okay. And Chuck, as a TV show, had never made me feel like that before, because it was always so happy and stuff. And it was almost kind of nice to see it do something a bit more impacting at the end. So I won't spoil anything, of course. And if I've not been doing a good job of explaining what these shows are. I'm just kind of assuming that people know what the shows are. Chuck is, he's a nerd who works at like a fake version of Best Buy who fixes computers, but ends up being recruited to be a spy, and he gets like a partner who he kind of falls in love with pretty much instantly. Or, well, it's not a partner, it's more of a handler, yeah. But he's also got a handler from the CIA who's Jane from Firefly. Adam Baldwin, that's his name. So yeah, just like, despite maybe what one or two actors are like in the real world, the performances, the cast are good in the show and are very endearing. Maybe if you've heard enough of Zachary Levi's shit recently, you don't want to look at his face. I kind of get it, but obviously that was not known at the time, and I still love Chuck, and I definitely will go back and watch it again at some point. Really good show that did finally get, it got its 5th season where they knew it was the last one, so it didn't end on any kind of cliffhanger, and that was really comforting to get to. So but also 5 seasons isn't super long. It's 4 full seasons and then 1 13-episode season, just a nice amount to get through. So that is Chuck. Number 38 is The Boys. So this is kind of like in this weird middle ground to some of these things that I've been talking about, where it's not finished yet, but we have 4 out of 5 seasons done. So I also felt like I had enough to kind of say what my opinion is. Now, obviously, the 5th season being amazing or being terrible could very greatly change how I feel about the show as a whole. But I do love The Boys, and I do think that despite all these jaded cynicism and the satire of having like evil versions of all the superheroes that we know from other things, and just how like darkly funny it is and how mean-spirited it is, the thing that makes The Boys work is that at its core, it still has a heart. There's still good characters who want to do good, and the show never forgets to give them love and make that be the thing that's driving what we're rooting for in the show. I think that's so important. It's actually why something that's very similar that I also love is the first Kick-Ass movie. Not the sequel. The sequel's trash. But the first movie that Matthew Vaughn directed is, I think, excellent. And that's also something where, despite all the dumb humor of like the superhero satire and all that, there is a heart to it. There's like a really strong heart at the core that makes you want to root for what they're fighting for. And I think The Boys also does that. And also Homelander is just a great villain. Like him being this man-child who wants to be loved and has always gotten his way because he has the same powers as Superman is such a good idea for a villain. Like The Boys, I kind of was expecting to not like that much. I sat down to watch the first episode when it first came out, thinking, oh no, I'm not going to like this probably. It's probably going to just be super in your face and be too, oh, we're edgy, we do edgy jokes about superheroes, and found myself very pleasantly surprised. And I love that they've insisted on it being a weekly TV show despite the fact that they're on Prime. Like the creators, Eric Kripke, asked to be a weekly show because he thinks the writing works better for that format, and that's what he's making. He's making a TV show. And I think he's right. I think a lot of binge-style shows suffer because they don't write with the idea that they have to win the audience back for the next week. There's this assumption you'll just keep watching. And I think The Boys is great weekly TV show when it's on. So, yeah, season 4 was a bit weaker than the other seasons, but I think season 3 was my favorite. I think it was trending upwards. I think 2 and 3 are phenomenal. 1 was really good. 4 is a bit more mixed, mainly just because it feels like it's all just setting stuff up for the final season. But even with that caveat, it was hard not to have The Boys on here a decent enough number, just because it has impressed me so much. And, it's also hit the zeitgeist. People post Homelander memes, they post, whatever. People are into it. Not that I really care if people are into it, but I just, I'm just kind of adding to like the cred that it's built. So here it is at number 38. Number 37 is another very new show, and this was also one I wrestled with where to put because of how new it is and how we still have to have more seasons, the conclusion, and that is Severance. And it just so happens that the one benefit of me not getting to finish this list and make this video until late March is that I got to see all of season 2 of Severance before I could make it. And season 2 is more mixed than season 1. It has higher highs. I think the highs that season 2 hits are incredible, but it also has some lows. It has the lowest lows of the show as well. It's a bit more up and down. It's not as consistent as season 1 by any means. But the concepts of Severance are so good, and they're so strong, and the way they explore the idea of the innies and the outies, and we're not talking about belly buttons here, we're talking about people who have been split up into 2 personalities, one that lives the outside world, and the other one who's only awake during work. The idea being that the company, none of their confidential secrets will get out into the real world. I mean, that's not the real reason in the show, but like that's at least at face value what it is, just if I'm selling the idea to the audience. But the idea becomes like, okay, but these people, these versions of themselves who are only awake during work hours, isn't it unfair to them that they never experience the outside world? Are they not just effectively slaves to the outside version? And would they want to rebel? And these are just some of the ideas and questions that kind of start to come up. And then there's also the mystery box stuff with the company that they're working for, what they're up to, what's going on. And most of that's pretty fun. A couple of things I think go a little bit too over the line into just being quirky for the sake of being quirky. But it's impressed me multiple times throughout its 2 seasons, and the ideas that it's tackled, how it's tackled them. And it set me up for at least one more season where I'm really fascinated by how they progress the story from here. But yeah, there was like an episode in season 2 that I kind of hated as well. Didn't hurt the overall show, but it did hurt my mood that week. I will say that. So, yeah, honestly, it's impossible for me to predict where Severance will end up on this list once it's done, because it really just depends how much I like where it goes. It depends how much I think it succeeds as a whole. But for right now, I kept it relatively low, but Severance is at number 37. Number 36 is Black Mirror, which is technically a British show. It started as a British show, at least, on Channel 4 for a couple of seasons, and then went to Netflix. And there's about to be a 7th season, if I'm remembering what number we're on. So this is an anthology show where each episode's its own effectively short movie, or in some cases they're just a movie, because some of them are like 90 minutes. And it's, you know, different types of science fiction stories, usually revolving around some kind of technology. That tends to be the main gimmick, is that there'll be something in each episode that's technologically advanced or different that leads to an idea. And some of the show's episodes are phenomenal. Like there's like a good half dozen episodes from this show that I think are some of the best science fiction that I have seen, and I love them, and it's why I'd recommend the show like wholeheartedly. But at the same time, it's an anthology, so it does go up and down, and you know, not every season has like enough winners to say, hey, that was a great season. Like I think a good example is that last season we got, where I generally kind of enjoyed most of the season. I think there was like one big dud towards the end that I didn't like, but I generally enjoyed all of the season. But I also don't think any of the good episodes were like up there with the best episodes the show has done. Like if I'm picking my favorite episodes, I'm picking San Junipero, Shut Up and Dance, USS Callister. Like there's a bunch of just phenomenal stories in Black Mirror, but it does go up and down, and I tend to like veer in the side of. Sorry, I'm just hitting my cat away, who's making noise by scratching the wooden leg of the table. Go away, Wesker. Thank you. So I tend to veer on the side of being a little harsher on anthology shows, because the one thing that's missing from them is the idea of like the build, right? One of the great things about television is the idea of building up with, if not a serialized story, which is the most obvious thing and can be so satisfying, at the very least the idea that the characters and the growth of the characters over time, even if they are in just standalone stories. Anthologies don't have that. Anthologies are kind of live and die in just the strength of how good each individual episode is. So Black Mirror, though, is a big deal, and it kind of very much is the modern equivalent to a Twilight Zone in many ways. But with a specific kind of view, a specific lens that it kind of looks at the world through. So, and it's kind of wild how long it's been going now, because season 1 was like 2010 or something like that. So, you know, and obviously it doesn't come every year. It's like, you know, every few years, Charlie Brooker comes back and does another batch of episodes. How many episodes varies each time. I think we're getting 5 again this time, but yeah. So, yeah, Black Mirror. It's, you know, if you like science fiction, there's a lot of great stories in there, and your mileage may vary. Like, you know, my opinion on some of the episodes doesn't necessarily line up with everyone. Like, there's definitely 1 or 2 favorite episodes that I don't love that much, but that's okay. There's a lot of great ones. So, number 35, we're back to comedy here, and this is Arrested Development. And to be honest, specifically the original 3 seasons of Arrested Development. I never could get through season 4. I just kind of stopped after a couple of episodes, and I just never had the desire to keep watching. And I also clearly never watched season 5 as a result of that. I don't know if season 5's reputation was better than 4's was, but 4 certainly was not that well liked, and everyone was just kind of underwhelmed by it. But ignoring that, the original 3 seasons is super witty, it's super inventive. The way that all the plots of all the characters in this crazy family all bounce off of each other, it's insanely quotable. You know, it's just this, you know, rich family who, because the patriarch is in prison for tax and fraud and whatever else he gets arrested for, you've got the straight man in the center played by Jason Bateman trying to keep his crazy family all together. But it's the kooky characters like Job, his brother, who's a magician. Like, he is so entertaining in that show. I mean, all of them are really, to be honest. But like, it's just a show full of like a lot of actors at their A game, and just the wittiest possible scripts. There's like segments of that show that are a little bit more serialized, and there's some that aren't. But like, it's very easy to kind of still quote things from that show. Like, I find myself going, Mr. F. I find myself saying, you'll never see these again, or this is the last time you'll see these again, or I'll bring up blah blah blah. Like, it's so dense with memorable ideas. You know, Steve Holt. Like, I've only watched through these 3 seasons twice in my life so far, and I can still like quote so many little bits from it. And I can't usually do that. Usually I need to keep rewatching things to try and keep that in my brain. But Arrested Development, a lot of it has stayed in there. But it is so dense with jokes and so dense with ideas that when I did rewatch it after having not seen it in like, you know, 5 or so years, I remember being wowed by how many things I'd also forgotten, because there was so many good little bits that I did not remember. Yeah, Arrested Development is great. It was one of those things that people were upset about when it got cancelled back when it did. And sadly, it came back in a form that didn't really quite work, and it wasn't as good. But those original 3 seasons are excellent, and one of the best comedies of all time. So there you go. Number 34 is Battlestar Galactica. So Battlestar Galactica, we're talking about the 2003 reboot series. Started with a big miniseries, and I went into the show proper. This was like, this was a really interesting time for my TV watching sort of life. But I know that sounds weird to say, but like the initial shows that I'd fallen in love with had kind of just ended around this time, and I was looking for shows to be into. And Battlestar Galactica, looked appealing from the sci-fi, like, sort of, subject matter, which is, there's a war between these humans and these robots called Cylons who inhabited other worlds, and now, like, the remains of the human race are being chased through space by the Cylons who are trying to, like, finish them off, and that's kind of the overall idea of the show. But, it does a lot of the stuff that a lot of good robot stories do, which is this idea of, like, they all kind of hate them because they kind of committed genocide against human beings and destroyed all the planets that they lived on. But, like, are the humans innocent in this? And, like, is there, like, just sort of, like, robot racism happening? And what constitutes, like, a life that we consider life, that we respect, that we love even? And I love the way the show tackles those ideas and those subjects, and it really is a show about that at its core. But there's also cool action sequences. Now, it's been surpassed in some ways by another show or two since, but I really have to emphasize how cool it was to get like a show with the level of effects that this had as a weekly TV show at the time when it coming. Not that it was the first show set in space by any means. Obviously, there were Star Treks and things like that, but in 2003, and this I think ended in like 2008, 2009-ish, over 4 seasons that were kind of spread out. This looked really good at the time for what it was doing, and having space battles where you'd have all the dogfighters like taking on the Cylon ships. It felt really big and action-packed. It felt epic in a way that a lot of sci-fi TV had not really achieved yet at that point, and certainly not that I'd seen at that point. So that stuff really sticks out. There's some falters here or there, don't get me wrong. Like, there's definitely some things that people critique about the show, but I think as an experience, it was a very important one, and it was also a show that had great music. Bear McCreary's music for that show is phenomenal, and I still listen to a lot of the tracks today. It's definitely one that I'm due a rewatch on because it's been a long time, and it did get a prequel spin-off that only lasted 1 season, which I only ever saw the first episode of. It didn't capture me. It kind of felt like we were milking it a little bit, to be honest. So didn't quite you get into the prequel, but the show itself is pretty excellent and does a lot of cool things. It's got a really unique feel to it, and it's probably kind of added some cool things to the sci-fi pop culture lexicon. Where I bet that there's people today who say frack is a substitute for an F-bomb, but don't even realize that it comes from Battlestar Galactica. But it kind of, I remember other shows like referencing it and using the word frack. I remember watching an episode of Veronica Mars and her saying frack, and it was clearly taken from Battlestar Galactica, which was airing at the same time. So, yeah, it's just one of those things where, like, and obviously it's not an original show. This is a reboot. This is a remake of a show from the 70s. But, like, the 70s show, from what I've seen, which I've not watched the actual show, but it looks, pretty cheesy. It looks kind of its time. Doing this kind of more down and gritty version of it, that's like, a big thing of the aesthetic of the show is that the ship looks really, like, old and worn tone, and it's lots of, dark metal and rust. It's not going for this cheesy sci-fi. It's trying to be a little bit more hard-hitting. And it taking itself that seriously did feel really cool at the time. Arguably, sometimes we go a bit too far in that direction where there's too many shows and movies taking themselves ultra seriously that you need to sort of like go back to something lighthearted. But this was like at just the right time. It took itself nice and serious, and it is fitting for what it is. And then obviously sometimes we're sick of the way Marvel movies are, and like everything's far too self-referential. So, we go through these like, peaks and valleys of like what we're all in the mood for based on what's been getting churned out recently. So yeah, Battlestar Galactica is excellent. I love it. That's number 34. Number 33 is Dark. Now, Dark is a German show, is a Netflix show, and is a show about time travel. And I don't want to really spoil too much about it, but this was one that kind of snuck out there, and and to be fair, it did kind of capture an audience. Like a lot of like the English speaking world did kind of latch onto Dark because it was that good. But it really takes the ideas of time travel, and because it's 3 full seasons exploring the idea of like basically a time portal in the woods that leads to decades prior, and all of the things that happen as a result of anyone time traveling. It's really just a big fun show that unravels as you start to reveal how things are connected in like the present day to the 80s and so on and so on. And I don't want to spoil too much, but it's really, really good stuff. And it felt like it kept like, it almost felt like the mantra of the show was to take like some of those basic time travel ideas and questions that you usually have, but because we've got like seasons of a TV show, we're going to get as complex with it as we possibly can in a way that makes sense and that's fun to explore. And in some ways it feels like, I don't know if there'll ever be a TV show that kind of explores the idea of time travel quite as much as what Dark did. And I really like the ending. I do think that sometimes it got a little like complicated for its own good here or there, but the final ending I did actually think was very satisfying, and I really liked the final scenes of it, which, it's almost, if it was guilty of anything that I could say as a critique, is that it was so obsessed with the time travel mechanics and mystery that maybe sometimes it forgot to make me care about the characters as much as I would have liked. But that's a relatively minor quibble, and it was a really... And I watched the first season twice, because I watched the season 1 again before season 2 launched, because I felt like I needed to. Or did I watch season 1 and 2 before 3? I can't remember. But I definitely rewatched before one of the seasons, because it was like, there were so many characters. Like, that was the thing about the show, is that there's so many characters, and you've got so many characters in multiple time periods that you have to like keep straight and keep connected, and you have to think about how the characters are linked to each other and linked to each other in different time periods, and like... it's the Charlie from It's Always Sunny like meme of like the murder board with all the red string. It's that the show, and it was a really fun experience going through it, and just having fun with it. So that is number 33. Number 32 is The Leftovers, which is a HBO show from Damon Lindelof, who worked on Lost and some other stuff. This was a show that I actually watched some of when it first aired, and then kind of like went away from it and didn't finish the first season. Not because I didn't like what I watched, but it just, I think at the time I was trying to talk to other people about it and they didn't like it, so I ended up just kind of like leaving it behind. But then me and Connor went back to review it, and it was actually around the time season 3 was airing that we started it. We finished it like after it had already ended, but we went through the 3 seasons of The Leftovers in like 2017 or so, something around there, and had a really good time with it. It's really stylish. And in the same way that I was talking about the OA, not that this feels like the OA, I'm not saying that. Maybe there's some things you could maybe relate between them, but more just the idea that it's got a very specific feel and tone that it wants to go for, and it's unashamedly that. Like, it doesn't pull any punches, and it says, no, we want to be this. And the fact that they've got Max Richter music like as their score the entire time is like such a plus. Like, the music is phenomenal, and it just gets you into the vibes and the mood. And it's, so much of it's about, because if you don't know what The Leftovers is, the idea is that a very small percentage of humanity just disappeared one day, right? Maybe it was the rapture, maybe it was something else, but the people who are left behind, the 98% or whatever it is, it wasn't 2%, it was something like that though, all have to question like why they've lost loved ones, where did they go, what happened, and the show was never going to answer what happened to them. And they made it very clear early on, this is never going to be a big mystery that's answered. That's not what the show's about. The show's about just exploring how the characters deal with this after the fact, and they all have their shared trauma, and we have these in-depth characters. You have Justin Theroux and Carrie Coon, who's just fantastic in the show, and it takes some big swings. It feels like it really wants to explore some ideas of like, because there's a lot of characters who are religious and they think this was a religious event. There's characters who don't think that. It's really great complex characters and really big ideas that by the time it gets to the end and it feels like it's doing these sort of things, it's very much the type of story where it would rather suggest to you something to get your mind going than just give you an answer. And even to the very end, that's its mantra. And I remember being very satisfied with the ending of the show. Even though I think season 3, because the 3-season show, I do think season 3 is the weakest of the seasons. I do think the ending of season 3 is very, very good. And there's a lot of good stuff in there. Plus, as if only just made for me, there's several jokes about Gary Busey in that show, which is wild. Which is wild, because I was already making jokes about Gary Busey years before Leftovers started, and then all of a sudden this show is like sort of carrying the torch and making it more of a well-known thing. So I'm pleased by that. So Leftovers is number 32. Number 31 is The IT Crowd. So we're back to a comedy and we're back to a British show. Yeah, this is one that just kind of like, it's almost hard to like talk about why I like certain British comedies. It's usually just the characters are just really funny more than anything else. Richard Ayoade is one of the characters. Chris O'Dowd's the other. I can't remember the female lead's name. But they're just this, she gets punted down to the IT department, which is just these two guys, and she hates that she's there. She sees it as a demotion, and eventually in season 2 Matt Berry shows up. So there's like a couple of seasons of Matt Berry, which is where I discovered Matt Berry actually, and I was very pleased about that. Which for the record, I still have to watch like half of What We Do in the Shadows, which is why that's not on this list. It might very well be when I finish it, but I've only seen 2 seasons and a bit of that show, so I couldn't justifiably like have it on the list. I'm just mentioning that because Matt Berry's name came up. But no, IT Crowd's very funny. It's one of those things where it's just, I think one of the things that British comedies are very good at is like planting seeds that really pay off later. It's something that I find British comedy just does a little bit better. There's maybe a one that's going to be much higher up that really makes me think of that, but it was just very good at like planting seeds or having running gags throughout an episode that were separate from each other, but then later on they would collide and it would make both gags funnier as a result because they would mesh really well. Or even just, you know, just super memorable fun ideas. Anyone who's watched The IT Crowd will know what I mean when I just say the internet. And that will probably give you a chuckle if you know that show, because you'll remember it and you'll remember laughing at what that was. And so just really funny, witty, and good build to payoffs of jokes where something's a running gag, but it's not just a running gag because it's funny to repeat a joke. It's a running gag because it's going to pay off into a bigger gag later. And that was something the show did a lot, and it's something that I think British comedy tends to be quite good at. So at least the best British comedy is anyway. The ones I like tend to be good at it. So that's number 31. It's The IT Crowd. Number 30 is Curb Your Enthusiasm. Now, I have not seen all of Curb Your Enthusiasm yet, because there's a certain point in this show where Larry David would take years between seasons. So I have seen, I think, 8 seasons of Curb Your Enthusiasm out of, what, 11? Maybe 12? I don't know how many. But I know he's done the last one. The final one actually happened, in the last couple of years. And I am looking forward to it. I suspect that when I do eventually watch it, I'll probably just watch it from the start and watch it all the way to the end. But Curb is such a unique show because, it's like, hey, it's Larry David. It's the guy who created Seinfeld. But we follow him. He's real. But it's not real. He's just based on himself. But he's playing like a heightened version of himself. And he's so George Costanza that it's just seeing this guy who happens to be rich because he made Seinfeld be ultra George Costanza in the world is super entertaining. It's awkward, and it's a bit of an acquired taste, actually. I remember when I first tried watching Curb that I didn't really like the first couple of episodes I watched because it didn't click with me. And there was just something, I don't know what episode it was, where it suddenly made sense to me. like what was funny about it and why it was kind of amazing watching Larry David just be around people and how he would like cause arguments. I think mainly it was too cringe at first. Like I had to get used to the cringiness of the situations, but once I got kind of into the rhythm of it, it became this like hilarious show. That again, just like him just having like weird arguments with his wife, or just the weird things he chooses to care about or argue about, or just arguing with someone about cutting in line. Just really good stuff, and it kind of took a lot of the ideas that were in Seinfeld and then furthered them into just almost like more raw version of it. Like Seinfeld was like this curated thing that was written, well, still obviously very good and very much of its own like flavor. You know, it was kind of still formatted like a TV show. Curb Your Enthusiasm was like, oh no, we're not going to even like refine the diamond. We're just going to give you the raw materials and show how wild it is to see this sort of play out in the world. Even though it is obviously still written, but it's presented in a very kind of like not docu, but like it feels like we're watching a real person going around in the world rather than a TV show, even though it's not really that, but it feels like that. And yeah, it's great stuff. Larry David it turns out, is really funny as the performer as much as he is the writer, and you know that works really well. So that's Curb Your Enthusiasm at number 30. Number 29 is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I realize this is probably going to be a weird pick for a lot of people. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is really good. Surprisingly good. Yes, again, like a lot of network shows, it isn't good right away, right? Season 1, at least for the first 2/3 of it, are pretty mediocre at best. And then it kind of gets good towards the end of season 1. Amusingly, because it kind of ties into something in the Marvel movies, but I want to make this clear. After a certain point, I liked this show than the Marvel movie stuff that was going on. And arguably, it might be my favorite thing to be remotely connected to the MCU. Because as it progressed and it started telling better stories, and the characters got better, they introduced some better characters to join the others in season 2 and beyond, like the saga of these characters and the running plots that they had were so entertaining to me. And in many ways, I look at Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as kind of the last of its kind for me. And what I mean by that is a network TV show that's like 22 episode seasons. Now, the last couple were only 13, but like most of it was 22 episodes a season, where it gets the benefit of having a serialized story, but it can also do standalone episodes in between. But it's really good because we get to spend so much time with all those characters, we get to develop them. And I think that art form of having like a good, well-written TV show on network TV that's serialized kind of went the way of the dodo, because so many writers and creators went to streaming, went to cable, and at a certain point, almost all the shows that are on network TV are all procedurals. They're all, like I say, CSIs, NCISs, your Law and Orders, so on and so on. It's mostly stuff like that. And a lot of the more higher concept or adventure shows like this kind of went away. And this one got to exist a bit later than a lot of the other ones, probably because it was connected to Marvel and it got to have a little bit of leeway from that. But the show got amazing. Like, season 3 had so much great stuff in it. Season 2 really developed like one of the main characters and like kind of solidified it and made me care about a lot of what was going on. I think season 4 is the best season. And they did like a really interesting thing in that season where they split it into 3 chunks and said, hey, this is going to be 3 arcs over the course of the season. And the second and third arc of season 4 is my favorite part of the whole show. And by that point, I was in love with so many of the characters. I cared about them. I cared about them sticking together as a team. Just really well done, serialized network TV show. Meaning that it's not this prestige thing that you get on your HBO or whatever, but really compelling stories with characters that you love to be around and you're sad to see them go when the show finally came to an end. Like, that's the type of show it was. And it kind of like, it was one of those shows where we kept worried it was going to get cancelled, and it ended up getting like these weird like extra 2 seasons that were pretty good. It had a lot of great stuff in them, but they were kind of like these victory laps almost, because season 5 kind of felt like, oh, they thought this might be the end and they gave us this big finale. But then we also got these 2 other seasons afterwards, and I was glad we did because there was a lot of good stuff in there. But Yeah, really, really good time. And, there's a lot of science fiction stuff in there, a lot of cool action in there, as well as the usual superhero stuff that obviously would come up. But yeah, like any good ensemble show where we're dealing with like saving the world, like you have to have a great set of characters. And it got to a point where I ended up really liking every single character pretty much. And occasionally there may be a guest character that I didn't like so much, but like the main core group were great. And yeah, it was also really funny at times. Like it knew how to throw in humor in a way that really worked. And I think having the witty dialogue and having characters like have a bit more humor in them works more in the TV show than it does in a movie that I'm supposed to take seriously. Because we spend so much time with the characters, and you get to have episodes that are more lighthearted or more serious. You get to bounce between them because you have all these chapters you can play with, and that's kind of what's missing from good long form TV shows right now is this type of show. So, which is not why I picked it, but I just it makes me think about that because it is kind of the last of its kind for me in a lot of ways. But yeah, Agents of Shield really good. Yeah, I don't always think it gets the love that it deserves. And when I think about the MCU now, like so many of the movies, I just don't like the idea of even bothering to rewatch. There's obviously some that I really liked, and I think that at some point I will want to rewatch them. But I think Agents of Shield though is like unconditional. Like I know I want to rewatch that at some point. I know I'm going to love going back through that on its own, regardless of its connections to anything. And at a certain point, I was like, yeah, don't connect to any of the movies. I'd much prefer what you're doing on your own. So yeah, 29 is Agents of Shield. 28 is Chernobyl. Now, Chernobyl's only 5 episodes. It's a limited series. It's a complete story, but it kind of blew me away when it came out. One, it was interesting learning so much about what happened at the Chernobyl nuclear plant disaster, but just like the exploration of like why it was worse than it needed to be, and like the reactions of the people involved who didn't take it seriously, who didn't believe it was happening. Like as an examination of that, it felt like it was really important as well as being very compelling and very tense. And then to top it all off, you had this kind of weird bromance that formed between the two lead characters who kind of hated each other at the start of the story. There was so much there that was compelling, and the actual interest from each episode was so good. The first episode just kind of blew me away with like the build up to it happening and the sort of the initial discovery of the severity of the situation was so well done. And it's a show that does make you mad because you see some of the characters like hand wave things or refuse to believe that something's happening, and one of the scientists has to step in and say, no, this is how many people are about to die because of this. And like seeing those moments play out were riveting, anger inducing, and just like on the edge of your seat for a lot of it. And it kept that all the way to the end, even though arguably all of the quote unquote action would be at the start of the story because that's when the disaster happened. But it kept it compelling, and the finale, which I won't spoil too much, but there's like a court case style of hearing where Jared Harris, who plays the main character, has to explain why it happened, and they do it so well. Like I felt like I understood it by the time he was done speaking. And there's like great character moments in here, and there's all this idea of like stepping up and like standing up for the truth, even though the state don't want to hear the truth because it's Soviet Russia and they want to bury everything and blah blah blah. All that stuff is super great. Like there's other limited series that I like, but it's rare for me to like sort of hold it in such high regard that it would be making it up on a list like this for me. But Chernobyl was so great that I have to throw it on here. So. That is number 28, Chernobyl. Number 27 is Father Ted. So we're back to the UK. This is the same creator as the IT Crowd, which I mentioned a little bit before. I've got this a little higher. And it's about 3 priests on a small island that's part of Ireland. Craggy Island, specifically. And it's kind of like, a satirical comic take on the idea that the main priest, Father Ted, doesn't like his posting. He wants to get away and be at a proper parish. The younger priest is a complete moron, for lack of a better term, who's really ditzy, really stupid, and doesn't get anything. And then there's the old drunk priest who just wants to drink and look at women and stuff. So it's very tongue in cheek, but it's got a lot of that humor that I talked about from IT Crowd, where it would be really good at planting things and seeding things. It was a very sort of like comical look at the idea of just comparing like being a priest to, you know, anything else, like, you know, like a cop who's been sent out to a district he doesn't like, or whatever. There's one of the best episodes is an episode called Speed 3, where they do like a sort of like a spoof of Speed, where like a milk float is going over 4 miles an hour, so the bomb gets armed, and it's really funny. It does a lot. It's only got 3 seasons. The actor who played Father Ted actually passed away, and it's why we kind of never got any more of it. But even just the 3 seasons we did get, are really good and really funny and very memorable. So I would highly recommend Father Ted. I don't think it's something that Americans have heard about as much. I think IT Crowd has kind of penetrated at least sort of nerdier corners of American internet, but I don't think Father Ted has, which is a shame, because Father Ted is really funny. So I would recommend it anyway. Number 26 is another comedy. It's another one that's related to one that I said recently, and that is Seinfeld. Now, I've actually went back and forth over the last like decade and a half since I watched both shows of which one I like more. And there's been times when I've thought Curb was the better show, but then there's times where I'll rewatch Seinfeld and I'll go, oh, this is actually really funny though. Like, this is really well done. And there is something to be said about having the multiple characters that are, you know, all leads who interact with each other. Like, Elaine is sometimes hilarious. Kramer is sometimes hilarious. Jerry is probably the one that's the least funny, but he's kind of the kinda straight man. I say kinda straight man because he's still a bit quirky, but George is the favorite though, which is why Curb ended up being so good, because George is based on Larry David, pretty much, right? I don't know if they've ever actually said that outright, but like that's my reading of the situation based on just watching both shows. Yeah, like them like getting into little tiffs about stuff, or an entire episode being in the waiting room for a Chinese restaurant, or being lost in the car park, or any of this stuff. Like, it's just all really good ideas. It's almost like just simple writing gimmicks. We're going, okay, we're just going to do this, and then what can we have the characters like have them do? What can we have them be complaining about, or what situations can they get themselves into? There's a reason why this hit huge. Now, funnily enough, that it never really was like a huge thing in the UK. Like, I sought it out once I was in my late teens, early 20s, whenever it was, because I'd heard good things, and I liked watching through TV shows. But it was never like a huge hit on TV here. It did air. I think it was on. But Friends was the big hit in the UK. Friends was being lapped up left and right by everyone. Seinfeld, which is the better of the two shows, didn't get as much love. I guess the it's almost like maybe it's just a little too witty for like the complete mainstream audience, at least in the UK. Like, I think Friends translated better because it was like something that even young people could get really into, because there was some silliness to some of the characters. You know, Joey was a very silly character. I think Seinfeld being more witty and more dry, like, despite the fact that British humor is very dry, and maybe that's the problem. Maybe there was too much dry humor coming from other shows, so Seinfeld just didn't stand out in the same way. But either way, it didn't hit quite as hard in the UK as some other shows did. But Seinfeld is excellent, and I don't really think it has a bad season. Really, I mean, I know some people think the last season or two dip a little bit. I don't remember that from when I watched it. Maybe if I get through the whole thing again, I'll have some different opinions there. But even if 1 or 2 seasons are a little bit of a dip, I think there's so much good stuff. And again, it's one of those shows where there's so many memorable episodes that you can quote and you can like refer back to, that it's worth going through it. It's just, it's worth seeing it to get the pop culture references that still happen today. People bring up the soup Nazi, people bring up the bet, right? Kramer coming in and handing slamming his money onto the counter. Like, those moments have endured on some level, and people are still referencing them to this day, at least people that are over 30 anyway. So no, really, really great stuff. And that's number 26. Now, I'm sorry to say that I think I do have to split this in two. Not that I mind this going to what will probably be 3 hours if I just kept doing it. The problem I have is that my voice is starting to go, and I'm feeling the back of my throat go because I've been talking non-stop for 80 minutes. So I'm going to split this into 2, and this will just be part 1 of my top 50. Obviously, the list is done. I'll get to part 2 in a relatively timely fashion. I'll say sometime next week, most likely, is when I'll get to part 2. But that is my first half. That is numbers 50 through 26 of my top 50 TV shows of all time. So by all means, give me your thoughts on the shows that I've mentioned in the comments. I would say maybe hold off posting your own lists until I do part 2, because, that's when the full list is out and people can compare all their favorites. But hopefully this was fun to go through and hear some scattered thoughts on some of these. I kind of did a bad job of explaining what the shows were, which I think some of them obviously are very famous and obvious, but if anything, I feel like this is supposed to be like you look at a best of list to get recommendations, and I don't know if me not giving the synopsis of each show is a hindrance to that. But my voice is going. I've been talking nonstop, so I'm going to wrap this up here and just say that you can look forward to the next part sometime next week. You can support everything on Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Helps me out a bunch if you do. And of course, if you want to, like, subscribe, all that stuff on YouTube does help as well. But yeah, Patreon's the main way to support everything and get some bonus content. MailFuzz Movies is the movie YouTube channel where all the movie podcasts live. Those are all 2-person shows, and every so often we'll do a countdown there as well. There's some of those kicking about. But anyway, thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. I'll see you soon for the top 25. But that is me, so thank you once again. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?